Well, I just want to give out a welcome to everyone, but especially I want to welcome our first-time visitors and guests. This is the Camden Roundtable, and if you would like to be notified of our meetings, our future meetings, and what the topics are going to be for each meeting, there is a sign-up sheet circulating over there. So make sure that you get your email and phone number on there. We do not inundate you with a bunch of spammy kind of stuff. I think once you get involved with the roundtable, you're going to like what you see. We are absolutely nonpartisan. Nonpartisan. The purpose of the roundtable, just to give you one quick background note, is all we try to do is ascertain factual and supportive information affecting the residents of Camden County, Georgia. That's all we want to do. Everyone is welcome, and there's no fees, there's no membership requirements, and we go out and we find people who are responsible for the topics that we identify as being important or simply of interest to people in Camden County. Anyone in the audience is also welcome to express their views or pass along any information they think might be helpful to the group. But that's where our only two rules come in. Rule number one is anything that is put in front of the round table must be supported with facts and sources. Okay? Number two, it must be presented in a civil manner. And we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I can't think of one obscenity that's been thrown in front of the group. So it's amazing how you can get things done if everybody maintains their cool, so to speak. Sometimes our topics strike a nerve with individual members, and they decide that they want to further study that topic. And we have at least a couple of instances where several of our people have decided to form small study groups on these particular subjects. And I'm going to give you two great examples of this right now. Both are really contributing to important developments in the community. One is the Get Out the Vote campaign to address the dismal, disgraceful turnout rates in Camden County. And that's not confined to Camden County, I know that, but it affects us. This is an ongoing campaign that will go on year-round. I've always felt that if you spend 6 weeks out of every 2 years trying to get people to change their habits, it ain't going to work. And it hasn't worked. But I think if we could keep after people over and over and over again and bring items of interest in front of them, I think it can have an impact over time. Tom Canning and his group have already made some significant impacts. And I think everybody here is aware of some of this. They've been registering large numbers of new voters. They've been helping registered voters to be more comfortable with the voting process, with the absentee voting process, the early voting, and even using the voting machines. They brought those machines into festivals and so forth and demonstrated them to people who might not be comfortable with it. So I'd like to recognize Tom Canning. Stand up. And I'd like to recognize the group that he's been working with. This Thursday evening at the College Coast, Georgia, beginning at 6:30 and ending at 8:30, the Tribune and Georgian will be sponsoring a forum with the candidates for St. Mary's City Council. And Tom and his group will be providing all the work to make that a success. So I want to thank Jill Hilton also for really taking charge of that. That's a great service. So I encourage everyone to attend that. And bring all your friends and neighbors too. We have a little more room over there even than we have here. Another example of an effective group is the study group that's devoted to spaceport and related projects. This group is headed up by Joe Anteo. And if these folks that's been working with him, if they can stand, some of the same faces. They will lead our efforts going forward to provide citizen support as the spaceport project moves toward reality. And it's very important that there is grassroots, ordinary citizen support for a project like this. That's extremely important, and I hope that more and more people will join in with Joe and his group. But that brings us to why we're here today. This is without a doubt the most exciting roundtable program we have had to date. Since locating a spaceport in Camden County will, without a doubt, change the lives of the residents of this county and all of Southeast Georgia. That's hard to grab hold of. But I think it's what makes it important for residents like us to keep informed and be involved in the entire process so that it's a positive process the whole way through. And everyone needs to have a personal interest in how the thing develops. So I'm really pleased to have with us today Dr. Robert Braun, the Director of the Center for Space Technology and Research at Georgia Tech. It just made us think that Dr. Braun is probably better qualified to talk about spaceport than, say, participants on topics. You might want to explain to Dr. Braun what that is. But I've asked Steve Howard, the administrator of Camden County, to formally introduce Dr. Braun, and Steve will be participating in the presentation as well. So Steve, it's all yours.
I almost want to take an offering up with this many people. It's still really hard. Help us around the budget. Not just so for a preacher, I've got to make sure there's money out in the crowd. But again, thank you. I always want to start these events out when I talk about the spaceport and validation. And one thing I always want to start is with this photo. And a lot of you might have seen this photo before, but I always like to look at it and say, why Camden, the history of Camden. In 1965, the largest thrust engine rocket would actually launch from, didn't go up, it went down in Camden County, Georgia, which oddly enough, people don't know that. Actually at the site that we're talking about. So it makes a lot of sense that what I say I want to do is make history again, yet once again. But I'm pleased to be here today, and I'm excited to have Dr. Bobby Braun. He's on Camden's team, and we're just fortunate to have him as an asset for us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Bobby Braun, his background a little bit. He's actually told me to keep it short. He doesn't like to pat himself on the back a lot, but wow, you need to Google his name and look at everything that he's done is just really impressive. But I'll start out with this. Dr. Bobby Braun serves as the David and Andrew Lewis Professor of Space Technology and Director of the Center for Space Technology Research at Georgia Institute of Technology. He leads an active research and educational program focused on the design of advanced flight systems and technology for planetary exploration. He has previously served as a leader and senior manager for several engineering organizations at NASA. In 2010 to 2011, he served as the first NASA chief technologist in more than a decade, which is really impressive. He serves on numerous boards. He's actually published over 275 technical publications. When I'm in the circle of all these space operators, the large ones, his name always comes up. And it's amazing, his background. He does live in Georgia, in Georgia, his wife and 2 children. And I said the only thing that's impressive, it's real impressive, his resume, but what we need to change is that he lives in Camden County, Georgia, and that he helped actually develop this spaceport. That's what I want to see happen the next time. But it is an honor and a privilege to have you here today with us. And again, to have him on our team. We're very fortunate to have him, and I appreciate him serving with me on this team as we make this a reality together. So again, welcome to Camden County, and give him a warm welcome, please.
Well, thank you. especially you guys way back there. Totally cool. I was telling my wife, I thought maybe there'd be a dozen people here. That was, I guess I should have thought more about that. And thank you all for hosting me. I got here before the sunset last night. I was able to walk around a little bit downtown by the waterfront. This is a beautiful place. I've been here many times to look at the spaceport and talk to Steve about it, but all those trips have been, I get here, I go to Steve, we have a meeting, and I get out of here as fast as I can, get back to school, back to teaching and stuff like that. But to be able to walk around a little bit last night and see the town as the sun was setting, it's really, really a beautiful place where you live. You're very blessed, I think, to be here. I want to take a step back and rather than focus on the spaceport per se, I want to talk just briefly about space itself, and then we can talk about the spaceport, because to me the spaceport is very important, but it's really just one piece of what's going on in the world of space, and I want to make sure you guys have the context for what's going on when you think about the spaceport. Well, first of all, space is a big place, right? If you watch Star Trek, I think you know that. But no, seriously, space goes on to infinity in all directions, right, from the Earth. And in the last 50 years, what has happened is that we humans have, in my view, have brought space into our economic and into our societal practices. We utilize space for all kinds of things today that many of and you start getting things like, Google Maps on your phone or in your car, the ability to rescue boaters when they're out, out at sea. All kinds of things come from this same data set. There are major economic benefits, not just military benefits. The military benefits, I think, are fairly obvious. But there are major economic benefits to a society that's utilizing space. So you can think about it from a remote sensing point of view. You can think about it from a position, navigation, timing point of view, and certainly communications. When you make a call overseas, it depends on the call you make, but it's likely that your voice is being carried up into space and back down, for global communications. And of course, the Earth is getting to be a smaller place in terms of economic development. When you buy a product today, it may or may not have been made in the USA. You may have partners in Europe or in other countries, and so having communications with those people is very important. And space is a big way in which we do that as well. Then there's the expansion of knowledge, right, which is something that I personally care a lot about. I want to know about the Earth. I want to know, I study all the planets, right, but the Earth actually is my favorite one. And I want to know what's happening on the Earth. I want to know if the temperature really is increasing or decreasing. And I want regardless of why that's happening, I just want to know, right? I want to know if the oceans, if the ice in the Arctic is actually melting and raising the tide levels in the oceans. I want to know about agriculture. I want to know about how crops are doing in various regions, or if illegal deforestation is occurring maybe in South America. These are things actually that, believe it or not, affect us all. They affect us economically. They affect us from a societal perspective. They affect our environment. We learn those things, all of those things, by monitoring the Earth from space. We also learn about ourselves by going out in space, robotically or humans themselves going out in space. So I've spent a good portion of my career sending probes to Mars. I'm actually a specialist. I have a very specific job. My job is to land the probes on the surface of Mars. I don't do much about launching them or getting them from Earth to Mars. I spend most of my time focused on the little 5 minutes that happens when they get to the top of the Mars atmosphere and they have to fly through the atmosphere and land safely. I spent maybe 5 years working for 5 minutes for each of these missions, along with hundreds of other people, by the way, around the country that do that. But we go to Mars for a variety of reasons. We go to Mars, and we study Mars and Venus, largely because they are bookend planets that help us learn about the Earth. Mars being farther away from the sun, right, is a little bit smaller, thinner atmosphere, colder. But we know that Mars, by the way, dry on the surface. But we know that Mars was once warmer and wetter than it is today. And we know actually that about 3.5 billion years ago, when microorganisms, when the earliest life began to form here on the Earth, that Mars was actually a very warm, very wet place, much like the Earth at that time. Now, do I know that life began on Mars? I have no idea, to be honest. But the conditions were actually very similar on Earth and Mars when life began here on the Earth. And so some may argue that life could have begun on Mars as well. And if so, don't you want to know what happened? Don't you want to know maybe for our own benefit what happened to that life? I do. Right? Venus, of course, is totally different. It's a runaway greenhouse kind of planet. Thick CO2 atmosphere, scorching temperatures, scorching surface. Iron melts on the surface of Venus, right? So not a very hospitable world, but and Earth is just right? It's the Goldilocks planet, right in the middle. And we used to think that Earth was the only place like it, but we're now through telescope observations, we're now learning that there are actually planets around all of the stars, right? So here's something fascinating for you that I think about a lot regarding space. If I was here in Camden County at this meeting 5 years ago, I would say something like, when I look up in the night sky and I see all those stars, I think to myself, there's got to be another planet up there somewhere. Right? All those stars, each one like the sun, there's got to be a planet. But I had no data 5 years ago. No proof, no images, nothing. It was just, if I was here 5 years ago today and I made those statements, it would be totally gut feel, extrapolating, and anybody could have called me on it. But today, I can say that for sure, because I know that there are thousands of planets around the stars. We actually have data now from spacecraft. We have data that has witnessed the evidence of thousands of planets. Some of them are about the size of the Earth. Most of the ones that we found, by the way, are huge. They're like Jupiter-sized because they're the easiest to find first. But over time, we're going to find more and more of these Earth-like planets. And if you think about what that might mean for your children or your grandchildren as this goes forward in time, it's really it's fascinating, I think, to think course, we have the human exploration of space, which I think we all want to have the right stuff. We all probably watch with bated breath as human beings climb on effectively bombs, right? These, controlled bombs is what a rocket really is. And they're at the top, and they blast off into space. They have these great journeys, whether it's to the moon or in low Earth orbit, or one day when we send humans to Mars, which I believe we will one day. We can send our robotic emissaries out and we can learn about these places, but there's really nothing like going yourself, right? I can go on the internet and I can kind of check out Camden County, but I never would have seen the sunset over the water that I saw last night unless I was here. Right? There's something about being there yourself, or being there as an emissary of all of mankind, to witness that, in a personable sense, right? That robots, frankly, can't do. And so human exploration is a big thing. So if you think about space, what I want you to think about is the economic benefits to space, the societal benefits to space, and the knowledge benefits, the answering fundamental questions about who we are, where do we come from, where are we going, kinds of questions. All of those, to me, space is the intersection for the answer in all of those sectors. Let me just throw out a couple of examples for you, and then I'll turn to the SpacePort. There are literally, space today is a several $100 billion a year market. In the developing world, where they don't maybe have the infrastructure that we have, space is actually bigger than it is here, because it's actually cheaper for them to just go straight to satellite dishes for TV or sat phones than it is to lay all the infrastructure for all the landlines that we started with in this country. So space is big in the United States, but if you look at some of the third world countries, if you go to various places in say Africa, you go to a big city in Africa, you drive down the road, you'll see on the hillside, DirecTV satellite dishes everywhere. I mean, just many more than you actually see in this country. So space is, the economic benefits of space are significant, and they're actually growing. Now, Georgia, in aerospace, Georgia is very well known. I think that we are one of the top states, in the top 5 states in aerospace. But when you get right down to it, what we're really good at is aeronautics, airplanes. That's our history. North of Atlanta, there's a big Lockheed plant, and they churn out tons of planes. Gulfstream over in Savannah, we have Delta Airlines. The Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, which is the busiest airport in the world. There's all kinds of parts being made throughout the state of Georgia. Georgia is very well known in aeronautics. There's a big workforce. It's a manufacturing kind of economy, and Georgia is very well known in manufacturing. But the space side of aerospace, Georgia is actually, kind of small in. And that's one of the things that I've been pointing out to our legislature for the past few years. The space side of aerospace is actually growing at a phenomenal clip, much greater than inflation. Depending on what index you use, it's something like 8 to 10% a year growth on the space side of the economy. The aeronautics side of the economy is growing is bigger in Georgia, but is growing much smaller at a much smaller rate. The states that are biggest in space are states like California, Colorado, Texas, Virginia, Maryland, those kinds of states. Except for California, which is also big in aeronautics, most of the others are not big in aeronautics. And so Georgia actually has, I think, a very big advantage on some of these states if we can pivot some of our skills that we already have in the manufacturing sector, that we already have in the aeronautics sector, and kind of point some of those skills towards space. And I actually think the Camden County Spaceport is the turning point that will allow the state to do that. And so that's really why I'm here, why I've been here many times working with Steve on this project. I believe in the spaceport, but I actually view the spaceport as a bigger thing to the state than just a spaceport. It's going to be a very visible symbol of Georgia's entrance into the space side of aerospace. And I think it will pull with it lots of manufacturing jobs, lots of people that may have worked previously in aeronautics into the space side. And there'll also be lots of opportunities for others to come into this field. One thing I do want to point out about the spaceport, just a couple things, and then we'll. I didn't want to talk too long. By the way, I'm a professor, right? So I can talk for hours. I'm pretty sure you don't want that. So just a couple things about the spaceport. The spaceport that you guys have been envisioning is truly unique. And it's unique in in a combination of factors. Its location is quite positive. The fact that it's been developed locally as opposed to some top-down government approach is phenomenal. And it will pay tremendous dividends, I think, in the long run. Another thing I want to point out is, does anyone know how many launch ranges the federal government uses today? The U.S. federal government uses today. Anybody know any of the U.S. federal government launch ranges?
Well, Vandenberg.
No, Vandenberg. Very good. Yeah, Vandenberg, Cape Canaveral. What's that? Wallops, Alaska, right? Poker Flats in Alaska.
Texas.
Yeah, there's not a federal one in Texas. So yeah, there's four. Well, depending how you count, there's four major launch ranges that the federal government uses. Right? And that's just the federal government. Right? That's not industry. That's not this this commercial sector that is rapidly emerging in space. So look, I know that there's news that's come out about other spaceports. And one of the messages that I have for you here today is it's not a single spaceport answer for commercial space. Commercial space actually is bigger than federal space, federal government space. Commercial space is more diffuse in their wants and in their desires in terms of where they want to go in space and what they want to take up to space, how they want to utilize space. Right? There are some companies that are talking about cargo service to the International Space Station. There are other companies that just want to launch satellites into geosynchronous orbit, which is an equatorial orbit, an orbit that goes around the equator. There are other other companies that want to fly suborbital flights for tourists who want to experience space. There are other companies that are planning to build hotels in space. I don't know if you laugh, but the federal government will not build another International Space Station. Right? We have one. It's a great place. It's an amazing scientific laboratory. And by the way, it's been continuously occupied for a dozen years now. There have been people in space continuously, not the same people, but continuously for 12 years now. Right? Well, the government is going to bring that space station down in the 2020s. And there are a number of companies that are looking to seize that market commercially, so that they would have basically a commercial space station that the federal government could utilize, but once it's commercial, they could use it for other things as well. They could host tourists. They could run scientific experiments. They could provide that service to other nation states that don't have a space program. There are many nation states that would like to fly their own astronauts, but they don't have the rocket technology to do so. And where those space station or space hotels will be, I mean, they could be in a variety of orbits, is what I'm getting at. So, space is a big place. The federal government alone has at least 4 ranges because space is a big place. The commercial sector is bigger than the federal government in terms of their wants and needs and diversity of interests. So my personal view is that there will be, as we enter this new age where the federal government is helping the commercial sector take over access to space, there will be multiple spaceports in operation, multiple commercial spaceports in operation. And I believe that Camden County Spaceport, has a great opportunity to be one of those. Let me, instead of me just keep talking, let me pause at least for a few minutes and see if there are any questions.
I want to ask 2 questions.
Because
Here.
Okay, because I came here really to address your questions, not just lecture.
Well, I actually got the author captured here. There's a board over here, and actually, when I got to know Dr. Bobby Braun, one of the things I wanted to do to validate this process is I know a lot about politics, not a lot about rocket science. That's not my expertise, but I wanted him to convince me why Camden was so important, what we could do in Camden County. And there's a board here that he helped create with his graduate students about why Camden. And part of it, you hear a lot about SpaceX, which is a great company. We've got good relationships I do with that company. A lot of people thought, well, Brownsville, Texas, they have a launch site there. It's over for Camden. But I think it's important, the orbiting capabilities of the site compared to other sites and why it's so important, what we can do here. Another thing I want to make sure I got Bobby here captured to validate is his expertise in Mars. If in fact this is one of a terrific site to actually go to Mars from, which is very interesting to think about. But I wanted maybe Bobby just to validate the importance of that, what this site does compared to like the Brownsville, Texas site, as far as the advantages fueled and all those things. But if you could validate just a couple of those points about those, and then maybe just open it up for questions, and I'll let you do that.
Right. So I guess nobody has like a softball or anything. I should have brought a globe, right? Would have been useful. So think for a minute about where you're located.
It's close.
Think for a minute about where you're located, right? And how far, in particular, how far you are away from the equator, right? That's your latitude. Okay. The closer you are to the equator, the Earth is rotating at a constant rate. The closer you are to the equator, actually, the faster that you're moving as the Earth is rotating. Okay. So if you're at the pole, you're at the point that it's rotating about, and there's effectively no velocity. And if you're at the equator, you're getting the maximum benefit in terms of velocity, maximum kick from the Earth's rotation. So the reason that you see launch sites moving south whenever possible is because of the Earth's rotation. That's velocity that a rocket doesn't have to impart to its payload. That's free. Right? And so relative, for example, to the Wallops facility, which is also going commercial, trying to go commercial, the fact that you guys are much farther south is a major benefit. In fact, Florida is a little bit farther south, but it's not much farther south, and it's a cosine benefit. And so the two are almost the same. The Brownsville, Texas site beats you, to be fair, in terms of this eastward kick. Okay, but that's not the whole story. You then have to think about launch azimuth. So think about, in particular, this picture, right here where there's a spaceport. This is east, right? So to get the kick from the Earth's rotation, you want to launch east, right? Or somewhat, with an easterly component. It doesn't have to be directly east. It could be northeast or southeast, right? The Brownsville, Texas site launches from there. They have to kind of thread the needle, if you will, between the southern tip of Florida and Cuba, so that they don't overfly populations. It's actually not a bad azimuth, and there are some very good trajectories that they can get to from that site, which is one of the reasons why SpaceX was interested in that site. But it's a pretty thin sliver of the orbital plane that makes up the sphere that is space, right? So you can go to some orbits very well from the Brownsville site, but there are many other orbits that are of economic, military, societal interest that you can't get to from that site. It's the same reason why why the federal government has a launch site in Florida and another one in Vandenberg that you guys mentioned. Right? They have different payloads going to different places, and depending where they're going, they use one site or the other. Now, the site that is most similar to Camden County is actually the current site in Florida. I mean, if you want to do a comparison, technically, the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, are closest in geographic, in latitude, and in terms of launching to the east. Right? But the big difference between those two sites is Cape Canaveral and Kennedy's built. It's owned by the federal government, and it's run by the federal government. So if you're a federal government payload, that's a good thing, right? Because you have the people and the personnel and the practices who know how to do that, and they're definitely going to continue to utilize that site for federal payloads. But if you're a small business who has an idea on some instrument or some technology that you want to fly in space, and you want to get there quickly, what do you think your chances are of getting to space through the federal government's site at Cape Canaveral, when there's military launches and civilian launches and other things happening there on a regular basis? What you need is a site that's dedicated to commercial operations. And so that's how I think Camden County distinguishes itself from some of the other sites. You distinguish yourself from Florida by the commercial versus federal kind of space. And you distinguish yourself from Texas via launch azimuth. So for example, if you wanted to take payload to the International Space Station, which is in existence today, is a prime destination for a lot of payloads in space, you wouldn't go from Brownsville, Texas. It'd be very unlikely that you would go from that site. You would go from either Cape Canaveral, if you were the federal government, or you would go perhaps from Camden County, if you were a commercial delivery service. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to point out is SpaceX is a strong company. They're a very good company. They're actually an emerging and growing company. But there are literally a dozen companies today competing in what I call the new space race, right? So the space race used to be the race between the United States and the Soviet Union, right? To send a man to the moon and return him in a decade. With the retirement of the space shuttle in July of 2011, was the last time the space shuttle flew. With the retirement of the space shuttle, the United States has said, we're not going to build a U.S. government access to space system. We're going to contract for those services from U.S. industry. And that created this new space race. That created a huge market, an anchor tenant for this new market of access to space. And literally for the past 3 to 4 or 5 years, there have been half a dozen to a dozen companies competing for the government rights to deliver government payloads to the space station. And in doing so, they've been building commercial services that are applicable not just to the federal government's payloads, but maybe to, I run a small business, maybe one day to my payloads. Maybe to, payloads from a science experiment at the University of Georgia or at some other university. Okay? So, by opening this up to the commercial sector and, taking it, I wouldn't say taking it out of federal control, but, moving it from a federal-dominated market to the commercial sector, you're actually greatly expanding the economic potential of space. You're opening up to lots of players. That brings in multiple companies. So there's SpaceX. In the suborbital side, there's Virgin Galactic and Xcor. Blue Origin would be another company Nevada, they have a vehicle that they're pursuing. So, there's lots of companies, and all of these companies are chomping at the bit for a place that they can have, that they can be a part of, and that they can launch when they want to launch. Right? That's, not when the federal government says, okay, we don't have a payload launching now, you can have this window. Which, by the way, those windows move around all the time as the federal launches move around all the time. Okay. So I think that's the niche, if you will, for Camden County. Thanks, man. It's, okay, yes, ma'am.
When we first started hearing about the spaceport possibility for Camden County, we were told that the state of Georgia, the governor, the legislature hadn't really bought into this idea. Has that climate changed at all?
Yeah, you want me to answer? I will. Yeah. I think the climate has changed. So personally, I've had multiple meetings with the Commissioner for Economic Development. I'm working with folks in the Economic Development Organization. When I came down here to tour the site and to meet with Steve, several of those people came with me. There's going to be, many of your local officials actually traveled up to Atlanta and met with the Commissioner and met with state legislative representatives to talk about what you guys are doing down here in Camden County. I think the state is, well, personally, okay, so I don't represent any elected officials, just to be clear, okay? But personally, I think the state is going to be very supportive of when Camden County is ready for the state to be supported. Okay? I think you'll get strong support.
What can the ordinary citizen do to promote spaceport in Camden County?
Well, so first of all, I think the ordinary citizen on this issue or any issue could contact their own elected officials, right, and provide your opinions either for or against any issue. I think, frankly, in our government that's a duty of all citizens. Second, I think you could get educated about it, right? So you could read up about it, about some of these economic benefits that I'm talking about where the spaceport is going to be and what it might mean for the local region in terms of jobs, in terms of Cumberland Island, just so that you have all the facts. And then you could talk to others in the community, frankly. I mean, it's great to see so many people here today, but I know there are many, many more people in the community that, have heard about this. And, there's one of the problems, frankly, with the development here is that over time, there's a lot of rumors out there about this project. I would say that the most important thing to do is get the facts and then explain the facts to your fellow citizens. I think that would be great. Yes, sir.
You mentioned when Camden County is ready. What do we need to be ready?
Yeah, that's a Steve Howard question. So personally, I'll tell you, I think you are ready. It's just a paperwork issue. But I'll let Steve cover that.
Some good news. I brought all these boards with me. I feel like I'm going to carry my boards around. I got so many of them. But that last board, actually, I participated in the leadership summit with the state of Georgia. And the good news is they're creating a strategic plan for Georgia. And one of the goals is actually to create a launch site. Actually, so obviously we have the capability of doing that. So I'm hoping they're going to continue that and do that. I think with the state, we're really engaged with the state probably more than ever right now. I'm currently under some non-disclosure agreements right now that I can't talk about, but we're real engaged as of, I spend about 20% of my time doing this now, spaceport stuff, but like over the weekend, for example, I was with emails with high-level state officials, even today. So I think there's going to come a time when the state's going to be really important to us at different things. I don't think we're quite there yet. They're engaged with different things that we're doing right now with operators, but we're not quite there yet. One thing, I think there was a question you had asked, what can the citizens do? at some point there's this EIS process. It's called the Environmental Impact Statement, which is a very challenging project to go through. As you go through that process, it's very open, transparent. At that point, we need all the citizens to participate in those public hearings and, really come out. Example, I keep talking about Brownsville, Texas, for example. They actually had about 400 people show up, all in favor of that. Those are things, you're going to have some opposition, I realize that, but you got to get the facts and realize that we can get through these hurdles. We can do this together. So one thing I'm going to ask Lewis to do is, one thing I'm going to do, actually, we're not going live with it yet, is I'm going to be launching a website for this project when we're ready to do that. It's going to be a great opportunity for transparency. It's going to have timelines on it. It's going to have what the public can do to get educated on it. So it's a real good opportunity to keep that open dialogue with communications with our citizens. So I'm going to ask Lewis he's going to do that in a minute. It'll be up there on the screen, but we're not going live yet with it. I've actually secured domains for it already. So we're ready to go. We're ready to go now. Once we get the property secured, which we're hoping to get real soon, to be able to announce that. The commissioners are here. Several commissioners are here. They've been extremely supportive. And that's another thing you can do is I want to applaud our county commissioners because they're the ones that are actually through the citizens funding this project. And this is really a risk. You're taking a risk. But like I said, you got to take the risk to reap those rewards. It's about an asset that no one else has. So I applaud the commissioners for standing behind, continuing to work with me on this project together. They're 100% backing this project. And that's bold. I think like you had said, when I'm with these space operators, I was just with one a couple weeks ago, and they said, this is amazing. We got to meet these county commissioners and the public because we don't see this at a local level doing this. So I applaud them and the citizens that are continued support. But he'll launch this in a few minutes. You'll see it up in a few moments.
Yeah, so just to follow up on what Steve said real quick, I've met with economic development officials and members of the governor's staff. I've met with local state legislative representatives about this, and all of them have told me that they're ready to go and ready to provide support as soon as Camden County is ready. So, yes,
Dr. Braun, if you think about the future and this is going to work, how should we approach this? How big is big? Should you can phase it in, or you can think that you'll have a niche market, or you can say we're going to be everything to all people and to all businesses. What do you think is the right approach for this spaceport long term as far as its size and capability?
Sure. Well, let me give you a couple of points first. I'm sure you've been to Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center. I'm sure you've seen the development around Cape Canaveral, the jobs associated with that facility. In the 1960s, what did that place look like? Think about that. Think about that for a minute. And then think about what this place could look like with a functioning spaceport, a couple decades from now. There's significant economic benefits to such a thing. In terms of what would the spaceport look like, I would envision a spaceport with multiple launch pads, with multiple companies utilizing those launch pads. Probably, you're going to have to work with the companies to figure out whether that's a lease or a buy kind of thing. I would look, as you are doing, I would look at vertical launch first. I think the facility is, the spaceport is much easier to set up, much quicker to set up for a vertical launch setup. But I wouldn't ignore horizontal launch totally. I'd bring horizontal launch along, maybe a little bit slower, but certainly horizontal launch is a technology that's coming. Those companies that I mentioned that are doing suborbital flights, where they might fly you in space, those are all horizontal launch. You get an airplane-like operations, right? You get an airplane and they go up over 100,000 feet. You experience space. One other thing that I would suggest that you think about is it's not really, a spaceport is not really just about launch operators. Okay. If you go down to Florida and you watch a launch of some expendable launch vehicle, that expendable launch vehicle may cost a certain amount. just round numbers, let's just say it's $100 million. Just to throw out, it's actually more than that, but let's just say it's $100 million. Well, that little payload that you can't even see when it launches because it's in a shroud and it's small relative to the size of the launch vehicle, that payload could be $1 billion easily. It could be a couple $1 billion for that spacecraft. And what happens when you have a spaceport, not only do the launch companies come, but the payload providers want to be somewhere nearby. They may not be, right in Camden County, right? But they don't want to be in Colorado or in California. They want to be somewhere nearby where they can get to that launch site quickly. Okay. So to me, this is why I said the spaceport is kind of the hinge point in a strategy, in a larger strategy to shift Georgia from aeronautics to aerospace. Because the spaceport not only brings in the launch companies, but perhaps even more important, it brings in the satellite developers, the payload developers, it brings in the operators, and all of that, all of the other infrastructure that goes with launch. Yes, sir.
Braun, you're an excellent speaker. You're familiar with this area now that you've been here, sir.
A little bit.
One of the things that needs to be discussed a little is how you're going to envision environmental impact, knowing what we have.
Yeah. Well, right. So the part of the process that Steve was just alluding to was the environmental impact statement, right? And that's a significant process that's going to take some time, and that can't really be fully kicked off until some of the other actions that Steve is working on are completed. Right? So I don't have to, to be honest with you, the data to make that crisp evaluation on environmental impact is still being gathered. I can tell you what I believe. I've been to a lot of launches. Okay. The launches that we're talking about are expendable launch vehicles, meaning they go up quickly. These aren't the kind of, they're not going to create a lot of noise. Yes, they'll create some noise, right? But they get up and out, quickly. There are also two very nice corridors, one to the north of Cumberland Island and one to the south of Cumberland Island, that can be utilized. Cumberland Island, I do not believe, is a challenge, to the use of the spaceport. The land itself is much larger than the spaceport, specifically needs, and so there's a huge buffer zone for this work. And then, frankly, I guess I can say this. Frankly, if you look at the companies that have been there in the past, and you look at what they've already been doing at this site, including this image right here, the type of activities that we're talking about are not new to this land. And so I can't stand here today and tell you that the environmental impact statement is done and we're good to go, and that's not true. Okay. But I can tell you that at a cursory, at the level that I've been able to assess it, I personally don't see showstoppers.
I'll comment on that too. Just from, look, I've been indoctrinated with the ZIS process, which is, I've actually studied these ZIS processes, and kind of what Dr. Bobby Braun said, and I'm going to go back to the Brownsville, Texas site again. If you look at that site, that was an undeveloped piece of property in the middle of wildlife sanctuaries where turtles beach on the beach. We're actually taking a piece of property and really what I call rehabbing it. It was a piece of property that was actually already utilized as an industrial park. If you also look at Port Canaveral, which is a national seashore, they were able to balance that out, just like we have. If you look at Wallops Island, you can actually look, when they launch the rockets from that site, you can actually see the wild horses running across the island by it. So what I always say is you can balance this out. There's an opportunity to do that. The other thing is, we really didn't touch on it too much, but the other thing is that typically you're looking at a first year about 4 launches, about 3 minutes, those launches. So you got to balance all that out with this EIS process, but they look at all that. It's a balancing, and you have to mitigate all of these factors, and there's a lot of things that go into it. So this process is no different if we were going to launch a space shuttle at this site. We have to go through the same process. So, but the good news is I think you can do that. The Brownsville, Texas, for example, they were able to get a favorable decision on that site. This site has less challenges I think that site had. We're actually taking something that was utilized before, I think, and be able to really make something good and balance it out with, I think, the environment and space.
Yeah, I guess the number of launches is an important point too, right? You know, in the first year of operations, there would probably be, as Steve mentioned, a very small number of launches. When the site is fully operational, I mean, it's still, you're not going to be launching every day from this site. You know, I think you're talking about a launch a month, you know, kind of pace. And you know, seriously, I would encourage you to look at video online of what an expendable launch vehicle looks like, what the launch of an expendable launch vehicle looks like. It's nothing like the space shuttle, right? So the space shuttle launches and it kind of sits there, and it just, you know, smoke comes and the noise, and it sits there, and it barely looks like it's moving. And then it gets up higher, and then it, you know, then it takes off, right? These things, the thrust to weight is so large that they're, you know, they're up and out very quickly. So you're talking about less than a minute of impact.
This might be a question for Steve, but when do you anticipate the public awareness conversations to take place with regard to the EIS and like where Dr. Braun was talking about down in Texas, they had 400 people at it.
You know,
When are we
that's
going to
a
have our 400 people meetings?
Well, I see Dr. Harden. I'm going to try to borrow his auditorium if I get it. But they would actually, that's part of the process. And what else? The EIS process, to make sure that it's not tainted, that process, what happens is typical federal government bureaucracy. But we pay for the EIS. We have to do an RFP process, which has already been completed. And the FAA actually picks the company. So the data call they have with these companies, the space operators, and the safety plans have to be in place, all those things. It's about an 18-month process. They have milestones at that point. When we get ready to go live, it'll actually be on the site. You'd get communications out. There'd be milestones there. They would coordinate all that. There would actually be in the newspapers, media outlets, and all those things. It's a very transparent process, but I can't predict that until we've done these other action steps, and at that point, the process kicks off.
Okay, that was my point.
We're not there yet.
When will the meeting start? So you're talking anywhere from 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, there'll be a milestone at that point. It'll actually be determined at that point.
Okay.
Of course, we're not there yet, so we can't make those dates up, but that's what will happen. It'll be a very open, transparency process. It's almost like very similar to, there'll be posters up, boards up, and there'll be opportunities for the general public to make comments, and the subject matter experts will be there, the third-party experts will be there, scientists will be there, and they'll collect all that, and they go back. And it could take multiple months. For example, the last EIS study was almost 42 pages of comments. So what happens, you have to actually go back, validate any of those comments, and then try to work through all those, and actually do supplemental agreements with all these different agencies. But it's a federally process that goes, and I can't get the data. So when this data process starts, that data is secured directly from that third party to the FAA. I can't say, well, why don't you send me a copy of what you're collecting? It's not allowed to happen in accordance with law.
All the way back.
All the way to the back, okay.
You next.
With regard to the Bronzeville site, did the state of Texas provide any kind of economic incentive?
Yes. Yeah, they did.
There's different numbers that they float around. It's about $15 million is what they achieved there. And again, that's actually the other difference with this Brownsville, Texas is, which would make Camden even more unique, is it's locally government controlled. It's actually a privately held piece of property. And also it's exclusive to SpaceX. There'll be no other operators on that site. So it's something that they have, and it's actually a leased piece of property, but approximately $15 million, and I've heard even $17 million.
Yes, sir.
I'm aware of Cecil Field, SpacePort.
Yeah.
And it's only 50 miles away. And can you compare and contrast what they would do at Cecil Field if they ever get off the ground in here?
Yeah. Well,
It
so
seems like they built something and nobody's using it.
Yeah, so Cecil Field, should it happen, Cecil Field is horizontal launch only. Right? So it's another reason that to focus on the vertical launch first here. There's no possibility that Cecil Field will have vertical launch. And, you know, I think we'll see how things evolve over time.
Is there any chance that you could put a lot of investment in this and nobody would actually come?
Well, the investment that you're putting in this is in vertical launch, right? So it's not a competitor with Cecil Field, just to be clear. I guess there's always a chance that nobody will come, sure. I'm not going to tell you there's not, but with the federal government getting out of the role of access to space and U.S. industry taking over, there are a lot of players. And there are many more players than there are places for them to go. So, yeah, I mean, this is all market driven, and I'm not going to stand here today and tell you I can predict the future. But given the characteristics of this site, you know, given the alternatives, it makes good business sense to come here, you know, should the site exist. Yes, ma'am.
As an aside, you mentioned Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach, that area in the 60s. My dad was part of the first race for space, and I spent a lot of time Florida, California, Florida, traversing the country. I lived on A1A South at the time. It was a shell road. There were 2 motels in town. It was, you know, we're far and above in terms of economically developed where Cocoa Beach and Cape Canaveral was in 1957.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree you are. I didn't mean to imply that you were in the 50s.
I just gave away my age, by the way. So.
But, no, I mean, I think you are well and above that. But if you look at the change that occurred there, and you think about what that can mean to this region, it's significant. I also think, by the way, in terms of logistics, you know, your location, proximity to I-95, to deep water access, to, you know, to barge and rail traffic. I mean, there's a lot of logistic benefits to this thing. Yes, ma'am.
There's a bit of a disconnect here that I'm trying to put together. You had said it's a little premature, or the two of you had said it's a little premature to get the state involved, and yet we learned from Bob that through his question that there are incentives for Brownsville. Why then are we not pushing the buttons of our leaders in Georgia, our governor, and some of the leaders? Why are we not pushing their buttons to get some incentives to help us?
Yeah. So,
Good question, Bob.
so let me just say that when I said that the state is prepared now and ready to support, they are.
Yeah, the way that Georgia's I've worked in several Florida and Georgia with economic development. The kind of way it's structured as well. For example, I'm under not some disclosure agreements. I can't really talk about it, but all these things. But typically, that process will play out because Georgia's well aware of these companies as we're working through multiple companies, large companies, billionaire-backed companies. These aren't fly-by-night companies; they're real companies. That happens. They know that's going to happen at some point with the incentive part, and that'll play itself out, I think. So other things that we're going to need from Georgia, which I'll be attending in November with some legislators, and we've already begun that process, is there's even more on the back end of it, the liability issue. They're going to want legislation passed, these operators, like they get in these other states that say if something happens, they'll have insurance and those things, but Georgia will have to do that. So that's going to be very instrumental in Georgia. I'm actually working on an opportunity zone out there at that site. I'm working on that with Georgia. That's something they could do immediately for me. We're trying to get that done. That's another incentive that these space operators will have out there at that site. But there will come a time where they're going to have, that'll play itself out. We're not there yet because at this point, we're still in what I call, we're in a dream mode still. We're still dreaming. We're hoping to secure this site. We're working on that. We're getting very close with all these. And at that point, I think it's kind of like what I call a game changer at that point. That's going to be a lot of good opportunity with these space operators. I'm actually engaged with more than 2 space operators right now. I mean, these are real companies. They've been in Camden County, they've been on our soil, and they don't do that just to look. The other part of it is a competitive advantage. If I'm a space operator, I want competitive advantage. And if I'm limited to 12 flights a year, I need multiple flights. I want multiple space ports to go from to meet my market. So there's lots of opportunities for that. That's when I talked about a gamble. I think, it's a risk you're taking on this, but I really think the return on investment is pretty large, and it would benefit, it would change this whole coast. I always tell people when I'm out in public that this will become, Exit 1 becomes Georgia's Space Coast. Right now in Camden County, if you look at these billboard signs, there's billboards for Titusville, visit the Kennedy Space Center. We want to have those signs in Florida saying visit Camden County, Georgia, home to Georgia Spaceport. So we have that opportunity that we got to remain focused on, and although it's like a long out there as we move forward to this long-term goal, it's achievable if we remain focused.
Yes, ma'am?
Well, Steve, just to re-emphasize what you said, the state normally will allow a community to go in and prepare an industrial site for whatever, and then they come in on the back end and incentivize the project that is coming. And I think they sort of have taken this approach up until now, and that is actually to your benefit, because if there are multiple companies, you have a little bit more control over who you actually get there, as long as you control the site.
One more thing, which I want to let the cat out of the bag here, I guess, for a couple envisioning process for Camden County, the spaceport. Mayor Morsey had talked about the opportunities for, on the spaceport. One of the things I would like to do with the board's consent as we move forward is actually have a master plan for this site. We want to have the best of the best to help us actually design the spaceport, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get it right. So we want subject matter experts like Dr. Bobby Braun and others to help us in that process. And much like George Power said, that process will play itself out, but we'll continue down that path as we move forward to ensure that we design this the best that we can for the future. Vertical is the best return on investment right now. These are companies that you can do it. You can actually turn this project over really in less than 5 years, which is kind of unbelievable. From start to finish, once you do this, it's a pretty aggressive type project that you can get approval for, and literally this is a real date that you could potentially do it, 2018, 2019, potentially, if you stay on target, doing some stuff concurrently.
Yeah, there's one other point that I didn't want to make that I should have made earlier. The other thing that the spaceport will do is I think it will inspire young people, I think, across Camden County. There's really nothing like going to see a rocket launch to kind of get you interested in science and engineering and technology. And if you think about the U.S. economy these days, jobs, more and more jobs are technological jobs, right? And so the way you, in my view, the way you can best prepare your kids and your grandkids for the future is that, spur, if they are those kinds of people, to spur their interest, to keep their interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You may not know this, but Georgia Tech has the largest aerospace engineering school in the country. We graduate more aerospace engineers every year than any other school. We have more faculty in aerospace engineering than any other school in the country. By the way, almost all of the space graduates, they start off mostly as Georgia residents. They tend to go to California, go to Texas, and they go to Virginia, Colorado, because that's where the jobs are. I would like a lot of those graduates to stay right here in the state of Georgia and to, keep that economic benefit of those the relatively high-paying jobs that I'm talking about in aerospace engineering. To keep those jobs kind of local. We see how things develop, but when you ask me the question about envision the future, I could envision Georgia Tech's Aerospace Engineering School having a branch down here at some point in the future. Sure. I'll run the branch, but whatever. But no, seriously, there's an educational side to this as well that I think also needs to be factored into your thinking. I guess, ma'am.
Change the subject, but this is a concern of a lot of citizens that have heard that
so I don't speak for SpaceX, just like I don't speak for Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic or X-Core or Orbital Sciences or Lockheed Martin or Boeing or any of the companies that might be interested in this site. But I do know that all of those companies want to launch from more than one location. Yes, sir.
Just a quick comment getting back to the education side. I teach engineering at the high school, and we throw any updates. I think there was a little thing on CubeSats, those tiny little satellites that the kids go crazy over that stuff. I mean, they just really, they're on top of what's happening with the commercial and the industrial side. They're looking at that. And to his point, be able to not only keep them in Georgia, but bring some of those kids back here to Camden County is an exciting thing.
Yeah, so at Georgia Tech, by the way, we're flying our first big spacecraft that was built entirely by students. It's launching. It's actually been sponsored by the Air Force, and it's launching on the first Falcon 9 Heavy, which is a SpaceX launch vehicle, and it's slated for April 2016. And the launch location is TBD.
One more thing, I think somebody brought up about Brownsville, Texas again. One thing that you cannot do in Brownsville, Texas at this point, which you could do on this side, is actually land. And that's actually something they're very interested in doing. And literally it's just, you have to see the video. You look at SpaceX, it's called Grasshopper, but it actually goes up and goes down. And that's what's so exciting about this opportunity is you could land it. You actually bring it back and do that. That's one thing, they don't have those capabilities there at this point. And that's another asset for this county. Another thing, just one more moment, is these space operators. Another thing that they really zero in on Camden County is the quality of life. That's really one big asset that Camden has that they enjoy. When they're here on the ground with me, and it doesn't matter if it's the lowest level in that organization that's here all the way up to the top, they all love Camden County. The school system, I've shared all that information with Dr. Hards here today, and they're just thrilled about the school system here, the quality of life, and they want to balance that out. So I think that's another advantage that Camden County has that others don't have. If you look at the Brownsville, Texas site, there's some disadvantages to that site with some things as well that here really makes Camden even more attractive to these space operators.
Yes, sir.
Well, maybe Steve, that launching in 2018, that's just for demonstration purposes for your website, right?
If we have these space, we're fortunate to continue to move this dial forward like we're doing now. And one of these space operators got extremely aggressive with this. There is an opportunity to do this concurrently, and you could do this. You could potentially control it. You can't control everything. You can't control that federal process. But if things did go forward, it's possible. Late 2018, you could possibly do that. More than likely it could be 2019, but it could happen if we continue to remain focused and things go like they're going accordingly. And if they took more risk as well. And that's some of the discussions I'm having with these space operators. The other thing with this kind of economic development project, which is so unique, is these companies are putting their money in it. Meaning that these companies have probably bid $100 million plus in Camden County, which is pretty amazing. When you look at your return on investment for economic development, it's a totally different type of economic development project that you typically don't have. I'm convinced that when we secure this site and move this thing forward, we'll be beating these companies off of us. It's going to be a whole different approach. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be very different because all of these companies are excited about Camden County. They don't get that excited just to get excited. It's about competitive advantage. We both have, I was with one space operator, and so we both have a mission. Our mission is to actually have a spaceport to see rockets launch. Their mission is actually to find a site to launch rockets. So we have the same mission. We can provide it if we continue to stay focused.
Another question? Yes, sir. Can you tell us about the relationship of Kings Bay Naval Base to Spaceport Camden? Are they going to be good with it? Are we?
They'll be involved in the process. Obviously they're aware this is not a surprise what we're doing. We're all over with this process, quite honestly. I got involved in this project really about 14 months ago, actually getting it moving forward with some of the key things when I got involved in this project. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation today if I would have been on this project early on. I would have secured everything. After I secured everything, secured operators, then I probably would have went live saying, here's an opportunity for a spaceport, and then engage the public and go that direction. So there'll come a time when they'll be more engaged in this process, and that's through that EIS process. They'll be a stakeholder, but I'm convinced if you look at that map, they're almost 10 miles away. We're going to project the opposite direction, and I think it'll actually be a benefit for the base. Actually, at the State of the County address, I had several people come up to me and said, you know, rocket scientists actually work on the base and actually commute back and forth to Port Canaveral. And they said, you know, this would be a great opportunity. Instead of us leaving the community, which we love, we could actually stay here. So they were actually really excited about that, and not a thought I had about that part of it. But so I think we can work with them. Actually, all of the installations now, most of them are actually military, are on those bases. So, I mean, they are already doing it. So this isn't like something new, but we're so far away, I don't see any impacts. Clearly, they'll be involved in the process, just like other stakeholders. But again, we can work together on that and find a solution to move forward.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions that I might be able to address today? All right. Well, hey, I want to, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming out, not on your regularly scheduled day for me. I had to teach yesterday, and it's great to actually see so many people here. I'm really blown away. I wasn't expecting this at all. And the questions are also very well thought out questions. So, all I can suggest is, keep thinking about it. Keep thinking about this and working with your local officials to make it happen. I personally believe that if it happens, that there would be some very large economic, societal, even from a national security perspective, some serious benefits to the region, to the state, to our country. So thank you very much.
Well, that was enlightening. I really want to thank Dr. Braun for coming down, and thank Steve Howard for helping to organize all of this. And this is an example, an excellent example of what an organization like the Roundtable can do. We get into little stuff, we get into big stuff. Our next meeting will be 2 weeks from yesterday, which is the 20th of October. And this isn't little things, but our program then will be, our speakers will be Jim Gant, who's the incumbent in Post 3 in St. Mary's, and also Roman Eskridge, who is a candidate for Post 2. We're not home now, Judy.
I got that on tape.
There goes my train of thought. And we do things a little different with candidates here. When we invite them in, we invite the candidates to come in one at a time, not the whole group, and not ever two candidates on the same program running for the same post. And that way, we can really get some in-depth questions going and that sort of thing. I think it's been pretty effective. We encourage you to come. Then the next one, 2 weeks from that, the first Monday in October, in November, James Coughlin, who was right over there earlier, he's the new executive director of JDA. He's going to present or share with us the new JDA business plan, which he can do now that the funding approvals have been made. That's going to be exciting. And then I just talked to Jason Spencer, the state representative for our area, and he will be with us on November 17th, I think that date is. And he'll be talking on a whole variety of things involving our district. So anyway, these are the kinds of things that we get into. You're always welcome. We want you to come out to them, and we want you to participate. Thank you so much for coming today. This has been great.
I don't want Bobby to leave without having a couple things. We have a few little gifts for him, but I'm going to hold this up because we created a bumper sticker for him to make sure he puts it on his car at Georgia Tech and drive it all over Georgia Tech for us. But I'm going to hold it up. We don't want him to leave without that. One other thing, we want to give him a copy of this rocket so he remembers that, so he doesn't forget. We want to make history yet again in Camden County, so we're going to give him that. And the last thing is a lapel pin that we want him to start wearing whenever he comes to work here at Georgia Tech and he's on the soil. So, but with that, I want to thank you for coming to be a part of this, Dr. Bobby Braun, and being part of Camden County's team and your vision for Georgia and for our whole coast. Thank you.